QSO Today episode 228, Joel Wilhite KD6W. This episode of QSO Today is sponsored by ICOM America, makers of the finest HF, VHF, and UHF transceivers for every level of the amateur radio operator. Visit ICOM at www.icomamerica.com/amateur. Update your holiday wish list. And by QRP Labs, makers of the QCX single-band transceiver kit and a host of other QRP radio kits and parts for the amateur radio builder. Click on the link to QRP Labs in this week's show notes page. Please support the QSO Today podcast by supporting these fine sponsors. Welcome to the QSO Today podcast. I'm Eric Guth 4Z1UG, your host. Getting out to Hamfest is the best way to meet other hams. As a result of my visit to Pacificom this year, I had the chance to meet my guest today, Joel Wilhite KD6W, who has a long history in amateur radio, telephony, and amateur radio TV. As you can imagine, amateur radio TV has advanced from the slow-scan memories of the early 1970s to high-quality digital television delivered by repeaters and Internet-linked networks. Amateur radio TV and microwave roving will be a few of the topics discussed with Joel, KD6W, in this QSO Today. KD6W, this is Eric, 4Z1UG. Are you there, Joel?
I'm here.
Joel, thanks for joining me on the QSO Today podcast. Can we start at the beginning of your ham radio story? When and how did it start for you?
My very first early beginning was, first and foremost, was my father worked for the phone company. United Telephone Systems had promoted him to become a branch office manager. So as a little kid, this was growing up in Hiawatha, Kansas. He would bring home some very esoteric things, Stroger switches, and later we had crossbar switches and things like that were, junk things pulled out of the central office that he worked in. That was the earliest delight. So we had ring telephones connected through the house on a party line, and so you could be in the basement, or you could be upstairs, or you could be near the kitchen, and then Mom would ring the phone, and we'd all come down for dinner and things like that. But the ring generator was the thing that you take a few of these things apart, and of course that's what we did. That's what I do. As an early kid, you just took everything apart, including the vacuum cleaner, and you hope you remember where you put all the parts. And there's another story there. But so the ring generator was the thing where you could get a few turns out of it, and it would kick out a nice little jolt out of it. So if you just happened to be touching it the wrong way, right where you were turning the crank, you would get a nice little hit. But running around with that thing was just a blast. And one of the first things was to mount it on something sturdy, because the cranking, if you ever shorted it, would take a considerable amount of torque to be able to get the thing to turn over. But my father was the biggest part of the influence, I guess, on my early aspirations. What opened my eyes was electricity and communicating over wires, and the early telephones. But the rest of that was added to when he came home with 101 electronics projects. I don't know if you remember those, but I think every kid had one.
Yeah, I sure do.
So this was one of those things. And one of the kits on it was a radio receiver kit. And so basically you put it together a certain way, and there you go. And so that I just shot straight to page 86. I didn't even bother doing all the simple ones. I knew what that was, so I just had too much fun. So yeah, the effect was, so my dad worked in telecommunications, and so I kind of always had the thought that my life would be consumed by doing things with communication. Obviously, ham radio was not even on the radar back then. It was one of those things where I was more fascinated with broadcast. I have to admit, shortwave was one of my big passions. listening to foreign broadcast through headphones or that little plastic one that they used to have for radios that you would stick in one ear, and that would put me to sleep sometimes. But so, my father, being the biggest part of the inspiration, would show me some of the stuff that he was working on. And it was just fascinating to me that, the level of integration that happened over time. I can remember as a little kid, one of the biggest projects he got to work on was at the toll office, was the ability to be able to read off the peg count from all the timers. So when anybody ran up a long distance phone call, it would go over a certain toll circuit. And so he was reading the accumulated counters from the trunk circuits that were going in and out of the lines going through his central office. And so then they would go back and the accounting offices would go find who was on the calls that registered all the minutes and made certain they had an accounting for all the peg counts to make certain
the message unit counts.
Exactly. So he came up with a device that essentially was, it took a big butcher block of paper that you fed in one end of the printer, and you took this big cinch joint connector and you stuck it into this one connector, and you'd hit this button and it would just start printing out numbers, and it would make a really loud racket, just crunch. It was making a lot of noise. And that to me was one of those things like, what's it doing, Dad? And he goes, we're making money, son, kind of thing. That was the kind of like the early beginning.
For me as a kid, Stroger switches and crossbars were the things of wonder, absolute wonder.
Right.
Were you ever into phone freaking?
Actually, no, because I
didn't need to.
Exactly. I already had a butt sit by the time I was 10 years old, so who cares? Kind of things. So basically, I knew not to get in trouble. So it was more important not to get caught doing something you weren't supposed to be doing, kind of thing.
So when did you get your first license?
1982. I was first licensed KA7TXV out of Phoenix, Arizona, where I was going to school at DeVry. So back when it was, I had to pass 5 words a minute. But it was one of the very first of the few years that VE testing had just started up, so I didn't have to go to the FCC office. That was kind of this was the cool thing. I was, completely nervous, as you can imagine. I'd studied quite a bit, trying to learn Morse code, and to pass the novice, you had to do 5 words a minute. But again, Brad was a really good teacher for me, so kudos to him. I was able to get through with enough of a passing score to be able to get my first novice license, a true novice license. You had to have 5 words a minute, kind of thing.
Remember your first rig?
It was the Kenwood that had the megahertz. It was a 2-meter. I don't remember the model number, but the megahertz had its number. The hundreds of kilohertz had its own knob. It was a synthesized rig, and it was already kind of old for the day.
Maybe the 820 TS HF rig?
No, 2-meter.
Oh, 2-meter. I know which one you're talking about. I don't remember the model number, but
yeah, but so it had
multi-mode,
and it had multi-mode. Yes.
Right.
Was one, and then after that, the very first rig that I bought, that I purposely went out and bought new, because I was thoroughly fascinated with repeaters at that point, was the ICOM 028T. It was like I was in heaven. That was the best radio, kind of thing at the time. And a lot of the repeater owners down at South Mountain had those rigs. That was kind of like the in your face to the Motorola guy kind of thing. So basically, That was like the second rig. My first HF
What was the rig
rig
that had the little thumb wheel switches, right, for the frequency on the top?
O2AT, yes. And then later it was and I also had the O4AT after that.
On UHF.
And so I had VHF and UHF. My first HF rig, it was a Yaesu FT990. I had that rig for many, many, many years, and then sold it about 10 years ago at the flea market down at De Anza. But so my biggest foray into HF after DeVry was running the Mars station on board the USS Missouri, NNN0 Charlie Kilo Kilo.
So were you serving in the military when you were on the USS Missouri, or was this
Yes,
just...
I was. No, this was 1984. I was finding it difficult to find a job at the time. It just was really poor timing for me. And one of those things was I had all the student debt. I had all those loans to pay off. And so one of the things I was looking at was on the fine print on the back of the loan, it said, you can defer principal and interest while serving in the active military. And I'm like, ding, I know what that is. So basically I said, you know, what the heck? I wanted to continue my college career, but money was a problem and so forth. But at the time I couldn't get into school, but here was this option. I was going to have to either start paying the debt, go get a job doing something else, start paying off all this college debt, or join the military. So I did that and ended up joining the Navy, and went through basic training in San Diego and went off to supply school in Meridian, Mississippi, and then graduated third in my class, was awarded meritorious advancement to petty officer. So I was a seaman for just several months, and then next thing you know, I'm a petty officer. The day I was about to transfer on board, they decided to take the ship out, and so I got sent back to the barge for a couple more days. But I'll never forget that day because that was the day the Challenger blew up, and so that was one of those. Wow, all these things were happening, and who would have thought that would have ever happened? The U.S. space program, it had never failed in such a spectacular manner before.
So let's turn the clock forward a little bit. What are you doing today?
Sure. Professionally, I work for Harmonic Incorporated down in San Jose, California. I'm a senior systems design engineer for the broadcast industry. So basically, the products that we make are designed to work in a particular way to allow broadcasters to compress their pictures. And so when you turn the TV on and let's say the antenna isn't quite good enough, but you might see some what's called macro blocks. People call it pixelization, whatever. Well, that's the digital part. So I work for a company that makes the products that are used by professional broadcasters. So most people don't know who we are, but you certainly know the companies that we sell our equipment to, and just name any of the major networks, and we're involved at some level. So NBC, ABC, to digital.
Did your interest in amateur television come from your being in the broadcast industry, or did it work the other way around, that your interest in the broadcast industry came from amateur radio and your interest in amateur television?
So it's actually the latter, because I go back to my days at DeVry, and I remember we actually had some equipment that we were messing around with that was amateur television. It was that early stuff. It was all analog, and the pictures were not that great, but hey, it worked and it was fun. But so my horizon got expanded.
So how has digital TV played out in amateur radio in the Bay Area? And does this have a long history?
Not so much a long history. We talked about it for many years. So my transition from telephone to television got me to thinking about, why don't we do digital amateur television? Because I was familiar with amateur television before, doing fast scan in the very early days back in DeVry, but there was just too few people doing it. There were some people doing it. Most notably was a group out of Ohio, which I think was spurred on from people that knew or worked with folks that worked at Harris Corporation. Funny story there. When I was working at Digital Telephone Systems, they were acquired by Harris Corporation. And so I was actually a Harris employee for a little while, and then I was laid off, but whatever. But so a lot of the guys in Ohio that were probably close to the people at the Harris factory over there had access to some of the very first earliest encoders. Harris resold or OEM'd, I guess, the encoder from Lucent Digital Video, which was that was John Mailhot's group. John Mailhot is the guy that did a lot of the engineering work. He was the big lead guy on the compression over there, on that side of the fence, so to speak. So Harris was our competitor at the time, but basically Harris made a pretty cool product, and it did, the basics of broadcast television compression. So I believe a lot of the guys in Ohio had access to that kind of stuff. And that's, I think, really what started them off. I believe they had one of the very first repeaters up and running, digital amateur television, a la, I think it was 8 VSB, because everything was kind of too early days to do too much experimenting. So they had to take what they could get, kind of thing. So basically, I can remember a few guys. I think Art Townsley was one of them that knew some of the guys, or was one of the guys that was working on some of those early digital amateur television systems.
And now this message from ICOM America. As we get past the contest season and into the holidays, it's now time to put an ICOM radio on your holiday wish list. So over the past few weeks, I've gone into a deeper dive on the ICOM rigs that you should consider. This week, the ICOM ID51A Plus 2 dual-band VHF and UHF transceiver is the perfect stocking stuffer for yourself or for the amateur radio person in your life. This portable rig provides new modes for extended D-Star operation that includes terminal and access mode, the ability to send and receive pictures over the D-Star network, and a free Android application that gives you extended features of this radio. The ICOM ID51A Plus 2 has all of the popular features that were found in the ID51A, including an integrated GPS receiver, an independent AM/FM receiver, and the dual watch functionality that you've come to enjoy. You can add a 32GB micro SD card and use the QSO recorder function to record incoming and outgoing calls. Forget your logbook? No problem, as this portable has an offline voice recorder mode for your important thoughts and reflections. And finally, even if you don't have a D-Star repeater near you, you can either use an additional ID51 Plus 2 in access point mode, or with a host of available hotspots connected to the internet to enjoy the D-Star network around the world. Of course, this little radio will work conventional VHF and UHF simplex and repeater channels as well. So if you're looking to have the most state-of-the-art and beautiful D-Star portable radio for a fair and incredible price, then check out the ICOM ID51A Plus 2 at your ham radio dealer near you, or go to www.icomamerica.com/amateur to find out more about this amazing portable rig. And when you finally make that holiday purchase, tell the dealer that you heard about the ICOM ID51A Plus 2 here on the QSO Today podcast. And now back to our QSO Today. I interviewed Art Townsley in episode 97. That's Art Townsley, W8RMC. And he was behind the DATV Express project. Now, was that picked up by the group in the Bay Area?
There are some guys that have followed the DATV Express.
But that didn't become the standard?
No, because I was looking at it from another angle. I wanted to make certain people understand that there's several things you have to understand about digital amateur television. First of all, it's part of the modulation, and the modulation is, whether it's QPSK or 8VSB or DVB-T or whatever, that's how you send the information over the RF. Well, the question is, are you doing what the cable guys did, which was QAM? And so they're 6 megahertz. Or if you're doing what the guys in Europe are doing, or DVB-T, well, that's 8 megahertz. Well, there's the satellite standard, which allows you to tailor the amount of spectrum that's used by changing the symbol rate. And most of the other equipment that was being used at the time was fixed to the 6 megahertz reference. So basically, they were pointing back to what the technology was that was used to be able to make that work in whatever the market was, like if it was U.S. broadcast or European broadcast, or if it was U.S. cable or whatever, you would use that particular modulation. Nobody was really kind of like looking at DVB-S except for I believe the guys over in the UK had been doing some work with it. I just didn't know how popular it was. But so I was a clear advocate from the beginning of popularizing DVB-S as a terrestrial mode, albeit it's not as sexy and high profile as, somebody needs, lots of bandwidth for running high definition. You need more bandwidth, more bit rate, I should say, to be able to carry high definition signals. So a lot of people focused on using, QAM 64 gear, which was cable, or 8VSB, which is U.S. broadcast, and this is where Art came on board, because he was an advocate of using COFDM, which was the DVB-T specification. And so basically, there's all these choices. Okay. So depending on which modulation you used, that was one way to look at, what is it you want to do? Okay. So it depends on what you want to do. Do you want to go long distance or send a lot of pictures, or what? So basically, the modulation was just one aspect of it. And then the other part of it is compression. So the compression is the process to be able to take the analog equivalent and turn it into bits. And so the bits are then put into the modulator, and then you can modulate that into a carrier, and off to the races you go. So basically, Art's first effort was, a great start to getting a lot of people more familiar with and more plugged into fast scan, albeit digital. And, there's so many advantages to digital, it's worth mentioning a few. If you get the picture, it's always a good picture. Yes, there's delay. It's got delay processing because it's digital. It's easy to deploy for a lot of people now that they have a lot of these kits now. It didn't used to be that way. But if you knew what you were doing, and if you knew what you were looking for, that was one of the things I was telling people in the early days. There's stuff that you can find on eBay or at the flea markets. If you know what to look for, you can usually, get parts and pieces of modulators or encoders and get on the air for pretty cheap. But not everybody knew all that. So that's why the kits were that was kind of the slick way to get going. They weren't cheap, but it wasn't too bad, I suppose. But it was a start. Now there's some other people that have come along with some other units that are pretty clever designs, and they cover a lot of different operating modes, but they're not cheap either. I mean, I'm trying to stay focused here, but it's hey, we're hams, so quite frankly, most hams are not looking to go drop several hundreds of dollars on doing this on a whim, because it's not a big part of the ham radio, kind of thing. We're more about, repeaters, analog or digital, either way, or we're into HF and contesting and things like that, or homebrew, that kind of stuff. And so, which case, this all means cheap. So it's not it's not for everybody. If what you wanted to do was to, get started in a new facet of the hobby, some of these kits are not, exactly, just under $100. They're not far from that kind of thing. But so basically, I've been kind of pushing and steering people in a couple of directions, hoping that they'll look at digital amateur television from the aspect of using parts and pieces that are on eBay that you can get them for a song. The encoders we used to make for many years, I see them on eBay all the time for much less than what we could have ever manufactured it for. So it's kind of gratifying to see that they're still out there. They still work, but so it means you don't have to go spend a lot of money. You can get started easily. It's not that hard.
I'm getting the impression that perhaps in amateur radio digital television, there's multiple standards competing, even across the United States. So, for example, what a group in the Bay Area may be using as a standard might be different than what a group might be using in the Midwest. Is this the case now, or has digital television across America on UHF and microwave, has that become a standard, and is that standard being driven nationally and even internationally?
Well, there's no real standard, and you're right, there's differences of systems. The systems that have gone up that I'm familiar with all started with analog at one point, but they've some have transitioned to digital in one form or another. Basically, it depended on the user base and whatever the comfort level was with the users in that area. So Art, he started one of the first grassroots efforts to be able to get, people, more active, and starting with that kit got them to do that. Well, now there's more than one kit and there's more than one way. Well, so then the question you have to ask yourself is, do these kits conform to, and, is there any cross section between any of the kits that when you operate them, will they interoperate with each other? Well, in some cases, no, because of the way the kit was designed or the way the modulation scheme that was set up inside the equipment, it doesn't necessarily always conform to the standard or the specification, however you want to put it. So you quite frankly are going to get some people in one area, working on a particular system. So they're going to focus on working with the kits and the parts and the pieces that their friends have. And so their system is only going to work a particular way. And so it's not like I'm going to be able to use my DVB-S receiver to work with a DVB-T output. It just doesn't work. Okay, so the point here is systems over time are going to have to potentially evolve to be able to increase or improve the cross-section of interoperability.
Do you see that interoperability maybe coming as like hosted hubs that amateurs might own on a server farm, like in a DigitalOcean droplet or something, as a way to transcode between systems?
Exactly. So where this is going is the systems, if they ever want to intertie, need to come down to some basic format. And, it's an agreement. Basically, you set up a a bridge between 2 points. You have to have some kind of agreement, handshaking kind of concept. So basically, most people are transmitting MPEG-2 today, so that's a good basis to start at, and that's the compression format. Audio can be MPEG-1 layer 2, that kind of thing. Then from there, you can transmit those packets, that's compressed video and audio, to another site over internet or whatever. However you link a site, that's up to you. So then if you're each sending MPEG-2 compression to each other, you can decode it or transcode it on the fly to be able to put it in the format of whatever is at the gateway of where it's being presented. So if I'm transmitting to Ohio, for example, and he wants to transmit in AVC, which is MPEG-4 Part 10, he can transcode or decode my MPEG-2 back to baseband and then re-encode it with his AVC encoder and then put it back out on his transmitter. So you can either do some of this in the cloud, but most people will probably have some kind of a demarc. They're going to be able to tie the two systems together to be able to take the other guy's format. They're usually not going to be transcoding at the RF because I don't see this being any kind of a long-haul transmission format. Television's never been that kind of a concept. Although there are a lot of people trying to get DX records, they're trying to find how far can you go with your signals, and so I see there's guys in the UK that are pushing DATV up into the microwaves to try and extend some of the distance records. But basically, it's getting back to the concept of transcoding. It's pretty much a foregone conclusion. Most everybody's MPEG-2, but not everybody. Some people have started to go to AVC or MPEG-4 Part 10. Very few people are up to the level of supporting HEVC, which is the next latest standard. So MPEG-2 is H.262. MPEG-4 Part 10 is H.264. And now we've got H.265, and that's HEVC. And so that's pretty cutting edge right now. But the day will come when our computers will be good enough, fast enough to be able to compress using the new standards. As they get more complex, they become more intense, compute intensive, and so it takes more horsepower. But basically, the systems that are out there today are running stable with MPEG-2, and now AVC has come on board. So basically, there's some of the products and the kits that are out there that'll allow you to operate in either mode. And then there's standard definition and high definition. It's your choice. It's one of those things where if you have the camera equipment, that's great to be able to support HD, but most everybody I know is happy with SD because, quite frankly, as we get older, we don't look much better on HD. So SD is good enough for me.
Can we go to what you're doing in the Bay Area? Because I think that most people who like me, who don't know anything about digital TV, wonder, how do you operate it? Meaning you have repeaters in the Bay Area that allow you to send transmissions between hams. Do those transmissions look like audio transmissions except with video, like push to talk, release to listen? What does a digital television QSO look like? And do you have the ability, like on audio, like DMR, or like All-Star, or like Echolink or whatever, do you have the ability to connect to other systems outside of the Bay Area in order to carry on the same kinds of video conversations?
Yeah, sure. The compressed output from the encoders fit nicely into IP packets, and so that means we can tunnel the content, assuming you have a link robust enough to be able to carry video and audio, then you can send it anywhere you want. The QSOs are typically roundtable-like, just as much as any other repeater, push-to-talk. The issue is you have to deal with the delay. And so the biggest part about digital amateur television is there can be upwards of 5-10 seconds of delay, depending on how many processing hops there are. But so that means everybody's watching the delay of the system. But so the guy, when he operates, he mashes the button, he starts talking. Usually there's a list of topics that people are asked to go down through in the roundtables that go on the machines up here. But basically all the machines have one of or a number of inputs. So if you still have an analog transmitter, you can start to transmit an analog, and then that system will convert and then transmit back on digital. And so basically the output of the system is to be digital, meaning if it's one big fat output, then they run it at a particular rate so that the video quality is of a very high level. So assuming anybody that can see the signal, once they get a lock, and that's the way digital works, you either get a lock or you don't. And if you do get a lock, then the picture is perfect every time, and it works perfectly. It's just that it has delay. So when the QSO starts, whether they came in analog or digital, it doesn't really matter. The system will then process it and then send it back out, just like any other repeater, on another frequency with more power, and off to the races you go. And so the QSOs, you'll be a couple minutes in your cycle, and then it goes to the next guy. So you'll see a little bit of a delay between the last guy stopping his transmitter before the next guy starts his, because of it's the processing delay kind of thing.
And now this message from QRP Labs. QRP Labs has shipped thousands of QCX QRP transceivers kits to date. The odds of working another QCX user gets better every day. If you're looking for a satisfying kit experience where you end up with an amazing performing QRP transceiver for under $50, let me say that again, for under $50, then you owe it to yourself to go to QRP Labs. We have many home brewers who listen to the QSO Today podcast. For you, QRP Labs also has parts, filters, enclosures, and other handy devices to make your home brewing experience even better. You can use these parts to either enhance your QRP Labs kits or to beef up your own homebrew designs. Be sure to browse Hand's entire website. Use the link on this week's show notes page or the one in the sponsored section of the QSO Today website to get to QRP Labs to buy your QCX or any of the other fine QRP Labs kits or parts. QRP Labs is my go-to ham radio kit company. It should be yours too. QRP Labs. And now back to our QSO Today. I don't see a lot of articles in the amateur radio publications about digital television as an amateur operating mode. What's the best resource for ham radio operators who want to learn more about digital television?
So I started a website some time ago, norcaldatv.org. So it's NOR-CAL-DATV.org. Some time ago, and I just started, it's just a blog. It's just me blathering about the different kinds of things to think about. And so on that website, I'm basically giving out the information and then answering questions for people that if I got a concept or a topic that's too complex, that's one of the things they'll ask me, hey, can you break down what does that mean, that kind of thing. So basically, I started that website to be able to just give out information about cameras and lightings and microphones and, receive-only systems, receive transmit systems, building up a multiplex, and so forth. So basically, that's my resource. Then, and so that's just me. I'm promoting my own website. How about that? But so then, of course, the guys over in the UK, the BATC guys, BATC or whatever, they are a fantastic resource. They have a bunch of great published articles about all the different technology over the years that these guys have been doing it. I consider them to be one of the foundations of all digital amateur television, because they've been doing it longer than anybody. I'm pretty certain they kind of started the whole thing, but because I don't know who else would have beat them to it. I don't know. I haven't seen anybody that's got anything else that's published that's older, that's better, that's whatever. So they're another great resource, and they're online. So if you just do a search on BATC, British Amateur Television, you'll see their link, and they've got, like I said, a ton of great resources. They've also got their specialized projects. They've also got their kit, the latest one being the ports down system, which it's a great tool. I mean, it's yet another thing that you can throw at digital amateur television, or I should say the amateur radio hobby as a whole. It's a great tool. And so they're one that I look to. And then there's others. The guys here in the States, they have their things and so forth. But I've been working with Fred, WB6ASU, and a couple of the guys that we're hacking on a version of the ports down, and we're kind of like stripping it down for our use for here and around the Bay Area, which so we're focused here on using DVB-S in the 1.2 gig band. That band is it's pretty wide open spaces for us here. There is a problem because we have there's an FAA radar over on Mount Tamalpais, so it does get into the input up on Mount Diablo, but it's beside the point. It's we're used to it. You just see the rotation of the scan come through the input, and you get used to it. And so it basically, the guys with analog, they've known about that for years. But with digital, you'll just see a momentary breakup, and then it goes away, and it just keeps right on going, and it's the same old system, but it's in its new flavor. So on the DVB-S system, Mount Diablo Amateur Radio Club has a nice system up on Mount Diablo, where I helped them out with what's called a 4-channel encoder. Then it knows how to do a thing called StatMux, and that allows them to be able to operate on one carrier 3 channels simultaneously, so that way you can have a true roundtable and still have another channel that other people can watch, so that it's like having one repeater with multiple simultaneous conversations. Just like in DMR, how there's 2 time slots. This is the same concept. And so then the way it works is, if any one of the inputs shows up and it's been assigned to go into the multiplex on channel 1, 2, or 3, it'll take over that channel, assuming nobody was there. And so basically, when the next guy comes along, and he wants to vote into the system, he'll get one of the other channels. So the original QSO can be maintained, and then a second QSO can start, and so forth. So basically, the system is, it's like auto demand, or however you call it. You know how whenever there's a conversation in play, you leave that one alone, go to the next slot, and then the next slot. And so basically, it automatically assigns slots.
Oh, kind of like the telephone company would do with trunk assignments, right?
Exactly.
Hunt group. So you've created hunt groups here. So
that's correct.
The first channel is being used. When somebody wants to use a second channel, they just ring in, and then they're now using the second.
Correct.
And you say you have 3 channels running, but the third channel is like just a general broadcast for people to see what's actually happening?
It's usually just like the deer cam, it's like they have a camera that's up there at the repeater site, and so the deer will show up every so often, or whatever, so it's the wildlife camera. That got put into place because of the fire that happened up on Mount Diablo many years ago. we actually got to watch the fire come up the side of the mountain in real time. We were telling the fire department where to go. No, go to the left, and stuff like that. So basically, we're going to keep that camera in forever. It's one of those, it saves us. Plus, it allows us to see who's, if there's somebody up at the site, we can see who's up at the site. And so it's kind of security camera and all that. But so the system has the ability to trunk today that we have not gotten that far yet. We're still in early phases on that. The link is being set up now as we speak. It's to be able to get the data out of the multiplex, we want to get it dumped into the internet so that we can then link to another site. And so we don't want to be solely reliant on using the output from the Mount Diablo transmission to be able to feed the next site. We actually want to link through internet protocol. So we're using some commercial off-the-shelf microwave radios. So that way we can get the data and then get it off the hill, and then we can move it to other hills. In the plans right now, we're looking to light up 2 more sites. One will be on San Bruno, and then the other one will be down here at near Alum Rock Park. And so that way we will have the ability to trunk any of the circuits in the multiplex between the other sites so that we can have a multi-multi two-way. And so the point is we can have multiple gateway ins and outs at any of the locations as long as everybody subscribes to the datacast network that will be able to share the talk circuits from the other mountains.
Well, this sounds like a very ambitious project. How are you creating additional hams then that are joining? What opportunities are you making for hams to come on board this video system?
So the basis of it is actually pretty straightforward and simple. It's go get a DVB-S receiver from Amazon. So if you go online and you just do a search on DVB-S, you'll see there's one of a number of very low-cost, inexpensive receivers that you can get for $30, $40. That's ham-friendly. So DVB-S is the QPSK modulation that we use coming off of Mount Diablo and soon to be other sites. And so that's the first step. And those little receiver set-top boxes, they support both MPEG-2 and AVC. So you're right off the bat, you're more forward compatible. One system start transmitting in AVC mode, you're ready to go. But the big ticket here is that receiver comes with the antenna port that usually connects up to an LNB, and it uses L-band. And the L-band spectrum happens to fall right smack in the 1.2 gig band. So with an antenna, for the 1.2 gig band, and one of these little cheap receivers, you just built a receive site. And it's that simple. And so for really low cost, I'm saying like under $50, you can put together a receive-only DATV receive system, and as it's digital, as long as you get the signal, this picture is always going to look good. So it's the other thing of, hey, once you get it, it's really exciting because the picture looks fantastic. So it's one of those, wow, that and the kids get it because they get to see the picture of themselves or whatever, and they're on TV, and it's like, hey, it's like YouTube, and you can say, yeah, you could say that. It's like YouTube. It's how you can get the kids into this. It's one of the best parts about it.
So the Mount Diablo Amateur Radio Club might be the one of the best purveyors of this new mode to their younger members at club meetings, or have you created a separate then user group of digital video amateurs in the Bay Area?
So I'd encourage people to just go to their website, just do a web search on Mount Diablo Amateur Radio Club, then go down to the repeaters page, tab, whatever the thing is, click on that, and then go look at the you'll see there's a link there for digital amateur television. And it's really simple. They put up a schedule. They put up the information on how to receive the signal. They tell you, what it looks like, how to do it, kind of thing. I think they do point to my website as a reference for more information, but basically they put up a schedule for their activity nights. I guess one of them is the Thursday night net. Then there's a Sunday morning net, which starts tomorrow morning, pajama net or whatever it's called. But so basically that's a good way to just start turning your TV on and seeing if you can get the signal. Unfortunately, their system, they turned the transmitter off. They're a little squeamish. They've been bitten in the past, so you can't blame them for turning it off. I encourage them to try and keep it up so people can try and receive the signal, because it's digital. If you can't get the signal, well, how do you know if the signal's not there? Well, you wouldn't know. And so the repeater, you have to know somebody to be able to key it up. So you have to know one of the people that has the ability to transmit, that can, once they key it up, then it will transmit for, I don't know, about 5 minutes or whatever.
I know that you're a home builder and home brewer from your Twitter feed.
Yeah.
What project is on your bench right now?
So behind me, you can't see it, but I've got my 10 and 24 gig radio. It's working now, but I'm working on some instrumentation. So basically, I'm a rover. With this rig, I go out in the 10 gigahertz and up contest out here in California. I'm a member of the 50 and megahertz and up club down here in Sunnyvale. I needed some more instrumentation. So basically, I wanted to be able to get feedback to a meter that tells me where my voice peaks are going on the power amplifiers, to make certain I'm putting out well enough. And then I'm looking at a way to integrate the I have the KX3. And so I also bought the PX3, I think it is, the little fish finder display. And I want to be able to integrate that with my IF rig. I use an ICOM, the 817. And I've looked at using the KX3, but I think I'm going to make a different rig. So my next rig will probably be the KX3, while this one I've already wired in the 817 for my microwave rig.
So that's the Yaesu FT817, right?
Correct, yeah.
Right, okay. Which is a very popular IF rig for microwave, it's my understanding, right? Because it's VHF, UHF?
Yeah, simple to use, low power,
all modes.
All mode, and it's not too heavy on the budget, that kind of thing. So, and they're pretty common. So you can find them from time to time. They show up at flea markets from time to time. And so they're far a bit improved over the FT290, even though the FT290 was very low current consumption during receive. So it'd make your battery last longer up on a mountaintop kind of thing. So that's a highly coveted radio. The old FT290 was the one I started with. But then the size of the 817 was a better fit. I basically architected my microwave rig to fit all within the length of a 2x4. And so the 2x4 is the thing where I mechanically put a shoe on the bottom of it so I can fit it into the tripod, and then everything attaches to the 2x4. And I made a custom little mount to put the 817 on, and it's just strapped in with Velcro. But it's all meant to just be very easy to set up and tear down, because I'm a rover. I have to be able to get to my site, set up, plug in, and then go out on liaison and try and get QSOs started, and then start to work people as fast as you can. And And then once you're done, plug it, unplug it, and then take it off the tripod, throw it in the back of your truck, and go to the next stop. And so basically, that rig has worked out really well for me. I've back in the early days when it was a 10 gig only rig, I was able to get second place in the 10 and up contest in the 10 only category twice. So it's all about the getting the points. It's the making the enough stops to be able to get the points. So every time you stop, you can work that same mountaintop over and over. And so it's all about making it very easy to set up. And so the size was important. So the 817 turned out to be, that was the nice fit. And I use it's a Dish Network reflector. And so that size is about as big as you want to be thrown around in the back of a car or a truck or whatever. Much bigger than that. And then it gets kind of heavy and it turns into a sail. And if the wind picks up, it'll blow things over and stuff. So the size is, just about the right size for the amount of power that I have to be able to just get the QSO, and that's what's important in that game. So, but my next rig is probably going to be a mountaintop rig. So I'm probably going to switch gears. I've been doing roving for as many years as I've been in microwave, and so I think it's my turn to be on the mountaintop. So that means you got to have more power, bigger dish, so that you can suck the signal out from the weak guys that are roving around that don't have all the power that you need to be able to get the long shots kind of thing. So a bigger dish, a fish finder, absolutely, so you can just see them show up and then be able to dial into them. So that means a little bit more substantial rig and more power and better preamps and that kind of stuff.
It appears to me that building and operating microwave gear is kind of an entirely different technical level, maybe requiring engineering skill sets. Is that the right impression?
Well, that's fair. Everybody, I too was nervous when I first got started in it. I didn't know really much of what I was looking at, but I was fortunate because I was, here in the Bay Area and around Silicon Valley. I'm surrounded by the people that pioneered a lot of this stuff. Will Jensby, who was a near and dear friend of mine who just became an SK not too long ago, was just a fountain of information on things that you could see and find at a flea market. Like you'd pick up this little thing and you don't know what this connector is, and I'd point to it and hey Will, what's this thing do? That kind of thing. Oh, that's one of those, and he knew exactly what it was because I worked on that project many years ago. So basically, having those people here as a resource has been a godsend for me to be able to know what am I looking at or what am I supposed to be looking for.
There's a lot of plumbing, for example, in microwave gear, right? So knowing which plumbing, which elbows, which mixers, things like that.
Right. And so that's really what it boils down to is it's not so much the engineering at the high theoretical level of, how to make a feed horn. Well, you don't necessarily need to know all that, the heavy theory, because a lot of the people that, that are the hams, the equivalent of me, working in the microwave industry like Will did and others around him, they already wrote those articles. So all you got to do is just get to the conclusion, oh yeah, here's the pattern, just, cut it out this way and solder it together like that and you're done. More likely, it's more of a discussion you have to have with people about the plumbing and or the mechanical, because that's 9 times out of 10, that's the thing that will fail. It's not that the design won't be as perfect or as optimized. You want to try to get it as good as you want. Yes, of course. But at the end of the day, if the switching relay is falling off or it's got a loose connector. Well, what's the point? I mean, so the bottom line comes down to, how good are your building skills? And so basic or prototyping or, whatever, kitting skills, your soldering skills, whatever. Those things come into question because it's those little things that will fail. And so when you start dragging your equipment out into a field or especially up on a mountaintop, if you break the wire, how do you solder it without a soldering iron? That kind of thing. Well, if you bring a soldering iron with you and you brought a generator, you're all good. But let's say you're out in the middle of nowhere. So here I am, going down the freeway to the next stop, and I get off the road and I go to set up the radio, and I'm looking at the radio and I'm like, ooh, one of my wires broke. Well, it's because it wasn't really well protected. There was nothing wrong with the joint to begin with, but I bumped it or something like that, and I broke the connector. So now what am I going to do? So I look at my map and I'm seeing where am I, and I'm going, where's, Google, where's the nearest Walmart? Sure enough, there was a town that was only like a couple miles away. So I go bolting over to the Walmart and I go, where's your soldering irons? We don't have soldering irons. Okay, where's your hobby and craft aisle? Sure enough, I found a wood burning kit. And there was enough solder on the end of the wire that I was able to take that wood burning iron into a lobby of a Holiday Inn, and I just went in, to where their breakfast nook area was, took the radio, put it on the desk. The guy looks at me like, what are you doing? I'll be out of here in a few minutes. I just need to plug this soldering iron in. And he goes, okay. And so I soldered the wire in the middle of, it was like I was near Lemoore or something like that in the San Joaquin Valley. And so here I am, like many hours away from my bench, and I did a retrofit repair in the middle of the San Joaquin Valley. But that's what you got to do. And so now, because of that incident, I have made a little shield. So I think what happened was when I took the radio and I put it in the back seat of my truck, I bumped the wire, and it broke the little connection. And so basically it was a delicate thing. And so what I did was I made a little shield so now it doesn't get exposed anymore.
So finding a mentor in microwave and then learning from experience is probably the best teacher. Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly where I was going to go. And I would also want to give a big shout out to the guys that host every year Microwave Update, MUD. It's a great conference to go to. It's filled with really super knowledgeable people. That's where I learn stuff too. And so I highly encourage anybody that wants to get into microwave. Of course, there's, stuff in the handbooks and things of that nature. That's a good starting point as well. But that's just to give you a taste. What you want to do is look for the past copies of the Microwave Update publishes a book of articles and of the presentations that are given. So if you can't come to one, then buy the book from Microwave Update. It's absolutely worth it because there's gold in them pages on how people have, put their rigs together to making slotted waveguide antennas to sequencers that you might need for your rig, stuff like that. So basically, that is I would think one of the best ways to get started.
What excites you the most about what's happening in amateur radio now?
Seems like the numbers are getting bigger. We've got more people that are getting into this hobby because of a lot of people are taking their community emergency response team type courses, the CERT teams, where one of the I took the CERT class here, and on the fifth training class was all about getting your ham radio license. So I believe that's given us a good influx of people that probably never thought about it before in their life, and now they're somewhat familiar with it. That's what I think is exciting because there's new names popping up all the time. I think the other part is, the crossover from, the people that like the hack stuff, the Maker Faire type folks. We set up Wayne Yoshida and myself and Brian Yee and a couple other guys. We get together every year for the big Maker Faire up here in San Mateo. And we put up a booth called Not Your Grandpa's Ham Radio, because we want to show the kids and the parents that it's not all vacuum tubes and old curmudgeons who are sitting around talking about the size of their tomatoes on 40 meters. So we're showing off our microwave rigs and all that kind of stuff. In fact, I showed digital amateur television this last year. It was a big hit. The kids loved it. But so basically, the crossover is with the different venues where technology it's kind of having its renaissance, if you will. I think it's a lot because of it happened a lot because of the internet. But so basically, with the advent of search engines and whatever, you can find just about anything you want. And so people are starting to learn that there are things you can do to help yourself during times of disasters or just to have fun as a hobby kind of thing. And I'm seeing that, and that's what's exciting for me. And so I'm trying to Elmer a few people right now, and I'm still Elmering a few people that have already gone on to getting their ham radio licenses. And for me, that's very gratifying.
What advice would you give to new or returning hams to the hobby?
Never stop learning. Well, of course, that's why we're here on the planet, right?
Right.
So the big thing for new hams is don't be afraid to blow anything up. Don't be afraid to be making any mistakes. Don't be afraid to just try anything. Just try it.
Joel, that's a great way to end. I want to thank you so much for joining me on the QSO Today podcast. It's been informative and interesting, and I'm hoping that when people tune in, they'll actually learn more about, how to operate digital TV, or at least know where to start digging into digital TV to become new experts in a new area of amateur radio. So with that, I want to thank you and wish you 73.
Thanks, 73s.
That concludes this episode of QSO Today. I hope that you enjoyed this QSO with Joel. Please be sure to check out the show notes that include links and information about the topics that we discussed. Go to www.qsotoday.com and put in KD6W in the search box at the top of the page. My thanks to both ICOM America and QRP Labs for their support of the QSO Today podcast. Please show your support of these fine sponsors by clicking on their links in the show notes pages, or when you make your purchases, that you say that you heard it here on QSO Today. You may notice that some of the episodes are transcribed into written text. If you'd like to sponsor this or any of the other episodes into written text, please contact me. Support the QSO Today podcast by first joining the QSO Today email list by pressing the subscribe buttons on the show notes pages. I will not spam you or share your email address with anyone. Become a listener sponsor monthly or annually by clicking on the sponsor buttons on the show notes page. I am grateful for any way that you show appreciation and support. It makes a big difference. QSO Today is now available on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Libsyn, and TuneIn, as well as the iTunes Store. If you own an Amazon Echo, you can say, "Alicia, play the QSO Today podcast from TuneIn." I still use Stitcher to listen to podcasts on my smartphone. The links to all of these services are on the show notes pages on the right side. Until next time, this is Eric 4Z1UG 73. The QSO Today podcast is a product of KEG Media Inc., who is solely responsible for its content.